Hey everybody, I'm Eric. I'm the VP product over here at Panther. My background is originally as a software engineer and then moved into product management. Super excited to be here.
Likewise, equally happy to be here, and I'm definitely excited to see the large audience that showed up today, especially some folks that are around the world. So I definitely appreciate you joining, especially given the different time zones that are out there. So in terms of my background, I was recently a veteran at Gartner as a top research analyst, covering SIEM and several other adjacent spaces, include XDR, endpoint protection platforms, threat intelligence, and have been working in the SIEM space for the better half of the past 2 decades. And part of that, the bulk of my career has actually been on the front lines and actually, overseeing security operations teams, both at the Department of Defense level as a military officer, so doing IT for the military intelligence, as well as different intel agencies. And then also at Fortune 50 companies, so 2 of the top MSSPs, and building out, combining and enhancing different SIEMs over the years at multiple different organizations. In addition, I've had a lot of different crazy experiences. So I'd like to share that with you today as we go through the agenda. And now I work with High Tide Advisors, and I advise startups and companies on best practices, which one of them just happens to be SIEM. So definitely happy to be here and happy to dig into our agenda. And it's really pretty jam-packed in terms of this. And what I want you to take away is really some of the challenges that we're seeing in the market, as well as where the future is headed in terms of security operations and security analytics, and what the optimal approach is in going about that. And really, I want to start off by just empathizing that the revolution is happening now, and everyone is really taking a look within their organization and looking at different ways that they can go about actually addressing threats, regulatory and compliance requirements, and analytics. And it's not a question of whether or not this is here, and it's not a question of whether or not it's coming and moving in a blazing space. It's just whether or not you're going to get on the bus, and how quickly you're going to get to that point. Because the platforms that are out there in existence today, that a lot of different large enterprises have, and even in the mid-market and mid-size, are no longer sufficient to perform at the level of rapid detection and scale, and the amount of flexibility that's required for these systems to be successful in today's threat landscape. And they were originally built for it to be for the gigabyte era, and the first SIEM that came out, and it was originally coined by Mark Nicolette and Amrit Williams from Gartner back in 2005. And prior to that, it was consolidated log management, and it was just the logging side of the house. And from there, SIEM was brought to fruition to help address the security needs, because prior to that point, organizations could go days, weeks, and long periods of time without even having an attack on their infrastructure. They could go those periods of time without actually seeing any kind of reconnaissance on their firewalls or having any kind of attacks or threats. And over time, SIEM came, and it was a new approach to security. Hey, let's log a bunch of stuff, and let's actually look at these threats and vulnerabilities. Let's prioritize them and implement it. And that evolved over time. And then there's another evolution that took place where more and more regulatory and compliance, especially in the financial and healthcare industries, with PCI, payment card industry, and HIPAA, and all the other regulations that came in the mid to late 2000s, really pushed forward the compliance side. So SIEM was like, okay, well, this is a good spot for organizations to do threats and compliance. And then in the mid 2015 to 2020, next generation SIEM kind of came to fruition, and that's where we introduced analytics for the first time. That's where we saw user entity behavioral analytics, UEBA, and we started taking and shifting things towards a risk-based approach. And in the past year with COVID and the amount of attacks that we've seen over this time period has really brought on this revolution of going to the next stage, because now organizations don't have a single infrastructure. They have multi-cloud, they have Google, they have Amazon, they have Azure, they have on-premise, they have private and public clouds. They have all these different infrastructures and all those different telemetry components that really just bring in all those different elements that are driving forward a large amount of data that is overwhelming SOC teams. And God forbid, if you don't have a SIEM in place in the first place, you're just looking at logs all day. And it's really difficult, especially for organizations that have a much lower security maturity level and are primarily only focused on prevent and not actually implementing the detection and response aspects. And over the past 2 years, organizations have gone about this, and it's been a really difficult struggle, especially with the skills gap and some of the challenges that SOC teams are going through that we're going to go through in this webinar. And a good analogy that I like to articulate is, like, as a security team, your main goal is to identify a needle in a haystack. So that is a specific threat that's impacting your environment that is imposing a risk, and you are exposed to that risk, and you need to manage it effectively. So the amount of time that it takes you to identify that needle and categorize it and prioritize it appropriately, that is ultimately what your goal is in the SOC. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, like, that's easier said than done. Now, with more and more data that you have across different disparate environments that you have, it can become incredibly taxing in terms of how you actually funnel those data, and how do you even look at the different event types and event logs and actually process this amount of data. I mean, it's doubled in terms of just over the past couple of years in terms of the overall data and how that data is actually being processed. And it's very overwhelming for the SOC in terms of that. And there's extensive research that's been conducted here by different leading third-party agencies, and Gartner and Forrester and all the different industry analysts that have been looking at the space. I myself have interviewed thousands of CISOs over the past couple of years and different security teams, and seen firsthand like what it's like sitting in that seat. And I've sat in that seat over the course of my entire career. And this is actually one of the first times, the past like 3 years have been the first time in my career where I've actually been advising and helping others and showing the lessons learned and the best practices that I've had, given my career in just the things that I've had and challenges I've had to overcome. And as you can see, I mean, these are some crazy statistics in terms of just the mass majority of organizations just are completely overrun in terms of these amount of alerts that are in there. And it's not just the alerts, it's just a lot of the security tools are out there. There's alert fatigue, but there's also security tool fatigue. So over 75% of organizations have 16 or more security tools in their environment. 16, that's a lot. That's a lot of swivel seating to the point where you're just going round and round and just getting dizzy. And the amount of like context and actionability that comes out of that. And it gets even more complicated once you start layering in threat intelligence and all these different elements. And it's also very expensive to maintain all of this. And a lot of organizations are looking to consolidate their vendors and looking to single solutions. And this is ultimately what's brought on the advantation of extended detection response and XDR, and having unified solutions where you can have that single view. And the other challenge is the scalability of it. So having on-prem infrastructures or not having it be properly architected from a cloud perspective, it really can be challenging, because if you don't have the data engineers in place, you don't have the best practices in place in terms of that scale, you can't do it effectively and in a cost-effective manner. So, and that's a lot of the challenges that exist today, especially with a lot of Splunk customers that are out there. And I'm just going to pick on Splunk here, where it's a very expensive platform up front, And in terms of the amount of data that you have, a lot of the companies that I've met with over the years, they have had to sacrifice on data in terms of limiting it to say 7 days in some cases. I've actually met a client in the past that they were basically down to 1 week, less than 1 week. So they only had 2-3 days in terms of data that they had, which doesn't help you from an investigation point. So the bulk of challenges are certainly out there in terms of that. So and the security teams, it's very difficult for them to staff currently. So a lot of, or the average tenure of a SOC analyst is roughly around 18 months. So it takes about 6 to 9 months to train them up. And then, by the time they're up and running, they're already out the door and going, unfortunately, to another company to do the similar thing for more money. And it's been proven that organizations, from a career perspective, individuals that end up going through their career, if they move from company to company, they actually end up making more money than staying with their existing organization. And this is seen. And in addition, there's with COVID and a lot of the things that have happened over the past year, there is something that's being called the Great Resignation, where a lot of almost half of the individuals out there are starting to look externally. So this is a problem that's not going to be fixed overnight, and it's not going to be a problem that's going to be easily solved. It's going to require best practices and setting that foundation to be strong enough to weather this storm in terms of not having enough people. In addition, there's a lot of silos out there in terms of between IT operations and security operations, and security operations and development operations. So in those organizations just not being in unison and actually being separated in silos. And in some cases, it's oil and water from a culture perspective, where they just don't jive with each other. And that has a serious implication on the business in terms of being able to manage that effectively. So, with all of this, what is the optimal approach? Like, what do we do about this? And what are organizations looking for, and what is the success criteria? And really, I break it down to 3 easy tenets and 3 easy things to understand, which is flexibility, scale, and speed. That is the solid foundation that you need to set, so you can actually start building layer and layer and layer on top of that. And it's key, and automation is certainly a major component to this. And with automation, there's some really great stuff that's come out recently, and I just want to highlight one of the great things in working with Panther over the past couple months is their relationship and their usage of a company called Times. So Times has basically a middleware that allows you to actually streamline your workflows. So it allows you to integrate with PagerDuty or Jira or Microsoft Teams or Slack or just any of the different components that you have or you need at the operational level. So being in the SOC and being able to collaborate with your team internally, and even work with third parties in interactions there, and set off workflows, and integration with SOAR, which is security orchestration and automation response tools, and extending your initial SIEM capabilities above and beyond where you are today. So and with this, the other things that you can do in terms of flexibility is extending it. And one of the things that I like about Panther is the ability to embed Python right into the management console itself. So when you're in a SOC, there's nothing worse than not having the ability to implement a detection rule, especially if there's some kind of botnet that's taking over your environment, or some kind of phishing campaign or something, especially if you're working with an MSSP or a large tenant type organization, so multiple different departments. I mean, it really can just wreak havoc, especially if it's something like spam related that isn't necessarily a high criticality. You know, being able to just write a Python script and embed it into the UI that I'm working in, I mean, it just totally bypasses the need to go to the traditional engineering team and go through the actual product development lifecycle and going through the different evolutions of that. And you know, one of the great things I loved about Panther is it allows you to actually uh, do change control right there. So you can have a peer review and have something off and running. So in the matter of minutes, you could have a actual detection workflow, you know, fully automated using tines, and then the organic and native capabilities of Panther to you actually do that end-to-end workflow for taking down wherever that threat is. And that might be in blocking and tackling, or it might be the response aspect, or even with compliance. And it's not just security either. You can actually use it in terms of, you know, more of an infrastructure as code, and embedding that Python code to help from a just from a IT ops perspective, and integrating this as part of your larger DevSecOps stack. So you start tearing down those walls. So now you have a unified team that's cross-functional and actually working across each of those different elements, and extending your capabilities to ultimately, you know, increase the prosperity of the business and meeting your ultimate strategic goals. In terms of scalability, it one of the benefits of and best practices around this is actually normalizing the data, and actually taking those different events that you have across the different, you know, hybrid cloud type environments. So actually having instances across Google and Azure and AWS and all the different configurations that you could have, and taking those different event types and log types, which can be incredibly frustrating, especially when you have to manually build filters. So I won't say what MSSP I worked for, but every time that we had to do an integration or collect up a new store, we actually had to build a manual filter every time, which would take, you know, we would have like our own software development team that separate from our engineering team, that would have to just build these filters. And it was incredibly difficult, and it was very time consuming in order to do that. So, you know, one of the other great things with Panther is it actually just normalizes all that data and streamlines it, so you can actually get it all in a single view. So this is like the equivalent of just having, let's just use a fishbowl analogy. So I have my goldfish in my fishbowl, and then I have, you know, all of his friends. So I have all the different fish bowls, and those are the different silos or data silos that you typically have. And, you know, ultimately what I want to be able to do is dump all that into a security data lake, so they can all be friends with each other, and I can all, you know, I can actually view them all together and actually see all those different capabilities. I can then take that information, and then I can actually, you know, break it down and actually put it into a data warehouse where it makes it a lot more streamlined. It has that normalization, and I can actually turn that into actions, and I can then turn it into actual business results, and ultimately increasing my security posture and alleviating my security team, and getting to that level. Because if I'm actually, you know, able to implement this and do it properly and move towards a more serverless computing capability, and going more towards the edge, which is part of this whole scalability aspect, is being able to reduce the amount of time that the IT operations team needs to do, because I don't have to update my my S3 instances. I don't have to do any kind of ongoing maintenance and health monitoring and management that requires to do all of that overhead, which can be very frustrating, and it's very hygienic, so it's not necessarily the most appealing work either. It can be very mind-numbing at times, as many of you certainly know. And you know, that's very key in terms of scalability as well, because I could easily ramp up instances and ramp down instances, and it's not going to change my view. It's not going to change the way that I look at the world and the way that I look at things in terms of the way that I need to do my workflows. And it really makes it easy to implement and manage. And especially when you can start automating these things and start moving them forward in this different way. So, and one of the going back to the flexibility aspect, using the detection as code is really great because of what I like to call copy pasta. So it's the best food in the house. So you can do a lot of copy and paste, and using an actual library and database, on GitHub or whatever repository you want to use in terms of collaborating with others and actually having a component of this change control, and actually having like a history of different detection rules and IOCs and different code snippets that you would use to evolve and look at these different things. And in some cases, especially with different malware variants and different tactics and techniques that you're looking to build your workflows around, a large portion of those snippets can be rebuilt because you're just looking for different things. And it's also key because you can further leverage different threat intelligence sources that you might have, and actually doing correlation across those alerts and actually implementing it. And the best part about this is just being able to have the flexibility and customization to tailor it to your specific environments. And it's that's the most important thing, because a lot of different SIEMs out there are very cookie cutter. What you get is what you get. And a lot of organizations will end up trying to do it themselves, and they'll try to actually build it in-house, which is great for the short term until those individuals that actually were part of that software engineering actually implemented that code. They end up moving into different positions. They end up moving from the organization. Like I said, the average tenure ends up being 18 months on average, and that's not a lot of time. And it does require you to maintain a software development lifecycle. So what ends up happening is over time, yes, you have the benefits of the customization, but what you lose is all the other aspects of, like, you now have to implement an ongoing component. This is a platform that you have to manage, and you have to manage it 24/7, 365, because it's now the lifeblood of your organization. It's where all your security events are. And it's where your compliance and controls are managed, and all these other goodies that you have in terms of doing your day-to-day operations. And unfortunately, what ends up happening is you end up painting yourself in a corner, and what ends up happening, you have to do that. You have to invest into doing a complete re-architecture, and ends up hurting you in the long run. So, what do you do about that? And there are best practices, and it's implementing these types of capabilities where you have this overlay, you have this single view, like Panther has, where you can actually have this overlay on top of your architecture, and you can leverage detection as code, and you can leverage Python to do each of these different use cases. So you have the flexibility and the customization to tailor to your specific environment, but you're removing all that extra overhead. You don't have to maintain the actual software. You don't have to maintain the backend infrastructure. And that's really great from a cost savings perspective. And it also helps hone in from a speed aspect to it. So now when you're serverless, and you're able to normalize this data, and you're able to actually use Python opposed to other different rules engines and different ways that you can actually do detections, it's lightning fast. Like it's as fast as the machines can move in terms of being able to get to that point where you're operating at the petabyte and at the exabyte layers. And that just dovetails into each different components. So these now become like a chain link, and they're tied together in terms of the overall success. The the other aspect is had this single view. So with one of the macro trends that are happening right now is Gartner, to pick on Gartner here, they've done extensive research in this area, which I've certainly participated in over the past couple of years. But just in the next 3 to 4 years, over 75% of organizations are going to look to reduce the amount of vendors that they have in their environment. There's far too many that are out there. And what ends up happening is you have one security tool to rule them all, and then there's some kind of limitation, and then you pivot from one to the other, and then there's different elements, and before you know it, you have Splunk, plus you have Datadog, plus you have this other thing, and then you're implementing all these different elements, and you have your EDR, your NDR, your XDR, your TLA, which stands for a 3-letter acronym, and then you're spending millions of dollars on different solutions, rather than just keeping it simple and focusing on the core things that you really truly need, which is having a really fast and robust solution that can scale up and down as needed and can be specifically tailored to your environment, so you can action things as quickly as possible in order to increase the prosperity of your business. I mean, it's as simple as 1, 2, 3. And it's that view and that aspect of it, of considering solutions that can have this single view, that can automate on the back end, and it can leverage each of the different use cases and requirements that you have, so you can specifically tailor it to your environment. And with that really helps with tearing down these silos. It really helps with the different cross-functional teams that you have, and eliminating that oil and water type culture where IT operations and security operations are now working as one. And then you're incorporating the security operations with the DevOps team as well. So you're actually unified all this. You're all using the single platform, the single interface, and the similar capabilities to address some of the use cases that are core to what you're trying to implement. And then one of the more important things that I want to highlight is it's not just about the technology. That is definitely setting a really solid foundation, but it's also the people, the process, and the technology. So the technology just makes everything a lot easier, and it makes it a lot more cost effective, and it allows for it to be as fast as possible, or at least more efficient and effective. And it does require lots of investment into your people. And the automation aspect, what I like is, especially with the Python coding, what we're seeing is a monumental shift. And this is part of this whole revolution aspect, where now Python and coding is becoming a security analyst requirement. And historically, that's always been like the mythical unicorn, where you have a SOC analyst that knows coding. Like that's an instant hire right there. Like I as a SOC manager, if I ever saw someone that knew how to code, had some Linux experience, and like knew at least something about networking and security analysis, or like at least knew what what the basics were, they were certainly getting hired, because they had the aptitude to learn, and they could help automate and help streamline things a lot faster. And those have always been the best SOC analysts, for sure, hands down. But there's those aspects, and then just having the technology and having the capability and it just opens the door for improving your processes as well. So you can actually build out a good solid knowledge base. You can build out these workflows, leveraging clients, leveraging the organic solutions and features that you have in here, where you can actually streamline things, and it just makes life so much easier, especially like just given the heartache and the pain that I've just experienced over the past 2 decades. It's just monumental in terms of basically what you're getting to is like it's detection at the speed of now, and it's having that mentality, and it's having that capability, and and moving things forward and just going into a newly revolutionized world, which is a beautiful thing. So just to recap a couple of things that I highlighted here, the three major tenets: flexibility, scale, speed. It's easy as 1, 2, 3. And so certainly, where do you start? You start now. You start today, and you have this. Really, you just have the mentality, the hypervigilance of taking a look at your environment and starting to think outside the box. The way that things have been for the past 2 decades isn't how we're going to spend the next 2 decades. And that revolution is happening today. And with that, it's going cloud native and scaling and being able to scale instantly up and down application data, events, logs, all those things, all the large data that's been doubling over the past couple of years. And being able to maximize the time to value, to optimizing, the overhead that needs to be managed on the back end. And then being able to tailor specific analytics to your specific organization and making them actionable. And then actually taking all that data, normalizing it, standardizing it, and then automating it. You don't want to run into a scenario where it's like an old episode of I Love Lucy, where you have this factory line where, like, on the conveyor belt, it ends up getting backed up, and you don't have the right workflows and streams, and you end up doing more harm than good. And you're certainly not able to maintain your operations because someone wrote bad code, or just didn't follow the process, or didn't do a proper peer review and all that. So being able to have control and having guardrails around that is certainly going to help in terms of being able to be as effective as possible. So last but not least, being able to operate and maintain that secure and compliant cloud environment. So compliance is key. This is something that's certainly at the forefront of everyone's mind in terms of being able to meet regulatory compliance, especially with all the fines that are being implemented, and just having it be a baseline foundation for security controls and being able to meet that, as well as maintain your business. You need to do that, and especially if you're a financial institution, you're in healthcare, or being able to do all the different things that you need to do as part of a business. The advice I have is to start that revolution today. So certainly consider Panther as being a opportunity for yourself and in your organization, especially as you're looking at your SIEM strategy and where you want to be in the next couple months and the next year and beyond, and educate yourself about the different ways and the way that the space has been evolving over time. So with that, I will be quiet, and we'll open up and kind of open things up to any questions that we might have. So we got one that I'm going to start with. So it's in the actual chat here. So the question is, we need help managing the actual instance. So this is a one-person shop that's asking this question, and they want to know about management. So what do you do about management? And they don't have the resources to do it. So what do they do? Well, the good news about that is Panther can actually manage this instance for you and do a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of that. And the other thing too is, like, once you actually implement it and you get Panther up and running, and you actually have these components, it is significantly easier to manage and use than a traditional SIEM. And some of the different versions that I walked through at the beginning of the webinar, the version, the SIEM 1, 2, and 3 in terms of the components. So yeah, it's key to understand that.
Yeah, I think just adding to that a little, management in the context of a SIEM has both kind of the DevOps piece to it, as well as kind of the traditional security analyst role. So there's just kind of keeping everything up and then being able to go through the alerts, triage them, and make sense of them. I think one thing that's really special about Panther is we push a zero ops philosophy. We don't think that security teams should be spending their time being like working in DevOps. And so that's why we're really cloud first as a product. On the analyst side, one thing that we're seeing is the engineering team being more involved in the security like triage process. And that's a relatively, somewhat new trend. People talk a lot about shift left. There's some aspects of it that are true. There are some aspects of it that are more nuanced. But I do think for small teams, being able to bring engineering in is a way that you can like add context to a lot of the security alerts you're seeing, especially around infrastructure alerts.
That's outstanding. Thank you. Yeah, there's another question in here too. And if you have a question, I think folks are supposed to put them in the chat here. Some of these are private, but I'll try to get through them as quickly as possible. But can you provide more insights why detecting threats faster is a game changer? And the follow-on is, how fast is fast? Well, I'll answer the second one first, which is the speed of the ones and zeros is certainly is about as fast as you can get. So with some of the research and work that I did with Panther, it was really mind-blowing, especially in the initial demonstration that I had, where I had to do a double take, and I was just like, what? Did that really just happen? And I grew up, basically using Splunk, using TruRadar, using some of the top level SIEMs, and I've certainly seen tons of demos over the years and worked with different solutions, and probably the bulk of the SIEM solutions that are out there. And I've never actually seen something operate that fast. So it's in terms of seconds. So something that would basically take you the better half of the day to run a Splunk report and do a look back for 30 days on certain queries, which is really not efficient when you're trying to do an actual investigation, a security incident investigation, especially when your CEO's got his hair on fire and wondering why the server room is burning down, and the company is on the front page of the newspaper. Those are all things that are time sensitive, and especially in terms of being able to identify the initial detection. So if someone is actually doing reconnaissance for your environment, on your perimeter, or on your environment, I should say, and looking for weak points in your environment, they're going to do that very quickly. And as soon as they infiltrate and get in there, it's your job as a SOC analyst to eradicate them as quickly as possible. Now, unfortunately, the average dwell time is roughly around 200 days, which is way too long for organizations to do that. Really, the golden standard is to be able to detect in less than a minute, investigate in 15 minutes, and then eradicate that in 60 minutes. That's really the kind of the gold standard. I think that as a industry, we can, especially in the next year into, we can definitely do a lot better than that. I think that we can get to the point where we get to a state of almost like self-healing, where you can leverage things like detection as code and some of the features and functionality that we went through today, and actually get us to the point where we can, as soon as we detect it, it's eradicated and brought back to a clean state. Then actually have an analytics report around, how we actually got to this point. So it's absolutely important to actually detect things as fast as possible, and then being able to do that as quickly as possible, with as little as much overhead as possible in terms of overhead of managing it and the IT ops side. This is an interesting one. So advice you have on recruiting programs. So we are in the process of expanding our SOC. You're actually adding 5 other analysts. So where the whole concept of Python and using it for coding is key, and it wasn't something that we considered. So the general question is how to how I understand this question is to, what do we do about recruiting program? And I would basically, I would definitely prioritize, especially candidates that have a coding background. And I'm confident that if you have the aptitude to learn, and you have the skill and the will, you will learn security very quickly, especially if coding is your foundation. And alternatively, there's plenty of security analysts out there that are now learning Python. Python is just a great coding language that really just, it wasn't very prevalent, and it's grown in popularity over time because of its simplicity and its ease of use. It's now being ingrained in everything that we're doing from a day-to-day perspective. And that aspect. So, very easily you could see where you could, hire a lot quicker. It definitely expands out your ability to recruit and obtain, valuable candidates. And then not only that, but actually level up your tier 1 analysts into a tier 2 analyst, because of all the automation aspect. They can now spend more time on investigating and getting down and not only identifying that needle in a haystack, but actually subcategorizing all the different needles that are identified, and then mapping and attributing them back to advanced persistent threat groups and all the different actions and preventative measures that could be taken place to prevent future attacks. So Nadia, how are we doing on time? Do we have time for any more questions?
I think you have time for a couple more.
Okay. Oh, this is always interesting. We've already made this investment in this leading vendor. So I won't call out their name, but a leading vendor in the space, and it was a significant investment. And we're finding out that there are limitations that we covered in the webinar today. And it says that how can this approach make us transition to a more modernized capability to achieve the scalability, and basically, why should we evaluate this approach since we've made this investigation, and how will we even go about phasing this out? Well, the good thing is, with Panther, and this was actually one of the questions that I had when I first started working with a team a couple months ago, was like, okay, well, if I spent 7 figures on my Splunk or QRadar or different instance, why would I use this? And one of the benefits is basically having that flexibility without doing it in-house. We're leveraging an enterprise level platform, and actually achieving that. So the cost of implementing it is certainly a benefit over time. And the good news is, because it covers hybrid environments, so cloud and on-prem and all these other instances, it actually plays well with other SIEMs as well. So it actually can act as a enhancement for your existing capabilities as you phase off from your existing SIEM. So you can actually run them in tandem in using it in terms of those capabilities. So that's certainly an added benefit, and that's usually something historically that it isn't something that you can do from a effortless perspective. So once you're locked into Splunk, like, it's pretty much a hard cutover to say a QRadar or another large SIEM. It's really difficult to do those things in tandem, and some of the log filters that exist out there, especially with certain integrations, you can only have the log sent in one direction. You can't do a bi-directional split. And then you have latency around the logs and disparency, and you have ETL challenges and a bunch of other stuff. So it's certainly a lot of challenges that are around that. So Eric, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but I'm sure there's something on the back end product that you could probably add.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is with respect to sort of to latency. Yeah, I mean, one of the big things for us is we think, you know, there's like building on top of a data lake basically separates out compute and storage. And so there's kind of query latency where we hear people who are like setting up Splunk queries or setting up, you know, competitor queries in the morning and then kind of picking them up at the end of the day, sometimes running them overnight. By separating out compute and storage, you're able to arbitrarily scale up speed based on the needs of your security team. So if you're doing a high priority investigation, you can throw a tremendous amount of compute at your storage, and that's something that only a data lake provides. On the real-time detection side, what's really exciting is being able to get a look into your logging pipeline as it's actually going through our system. And so what's cool about Panther is as soon as that data hits your system, we're able to pick it up and process it very, very quickly. And so we can jump on things quite quickly there. Usually that latency is in like seconds to low minutes.
Yeah, it's outstanding. It's quite amazing to see it firsthand. It's kind of one of those things like you got to see it to believe it. So yeah, I think that's it for questions for right now. If you have anything else, please reach out to the team after the fact. We would love to connect with you and reach out and do a deep dive. So you know, thank you for attending, and I certainly appreciate it, especially given everyone in different time zones, and you know, it's late and early depending on where you're at. And then you know, the other thing that I'll call out is our ebook that we have, which is the 5 reasons you should rethink your SIEM strategy, which is available on the Panther website. So highly recommend checking that out and then connecting with the Panther team to learn more. So